I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. At 70 years old, standing on a frozen sidewalk with $47 in a duffel bag, I made a decision that would change everything. My son-in-law had just locked me out of his house. My daughter couldn't even look at me. They thought I'd disappear quietly into the night. They were wrong. What happened next? I bought a house for $3. Yes, you heard that right, $3. And when they declared me legally dead to steal my life savings, I was very much alive, surviving in that broken house through the harshest winter South Dakota had ever seen. This is the story of how I lost everything, survived on nothing, and made them all pay the price. It was October 8th, and the evening air in Madison, Wisconsin had that sharp bite that tells you winter's not far behind. I sat in the living room of my daughter Maggie's house. Well, technically it was her husband Steven's house. He never let me forget that. The television murmured in the corner some game show I'd stopped paying attention to weeks ago. I was folding laundry. Maggie's laundry, because that's what I did to earn my keep. Cook, clean, watch the grandkids stay quiet, stay small, stay grateful. The front door opened. Steven walked in, his expensive leather briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. He didn't look at me. He never really looked at me, just through me like I was a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. Maggie came down the stairs. I could tell from her red-rimmed eyes she'd been crying again. My heart ached for her, but lately she wouldn't let me close enough to ask what was wrong. Steven set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud. "We need to talk." I set down the shirt I was folding. "Of course. Is everything all right?" He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. Not anger that I could have handled. This was something worse. Contempt. Like I was something dirty he'd stepped in and couldn't wait to scrape off his shoe. "You need to leave," he said. His voice was flat businesslike. "Tonight." The room tilted. I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. What, Steven, I don't understand. There's nothing to understand. This isn't working out. You need to find somewhere else to live." I turned to Maggie. She was staring at the carpet, her hands twisted together so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Maggie, sweetheart, what's happening?" She squeezed her eyes shut. A tear slid down her cheek and disappeared into the carpet she was studying so intently. "Maggie, please," I whispered. Steven's voice cut through the room like a knife. "She agrees with me. Don't you, Angela?" My daughter, the little girl I'd rocked through nightmares, the teenager I'd stayed up with through heartbreak, the woman I'd stood beside when her father died, that daughter couldn't even look at me. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Steven, please, I won't be any trouble. I can sleep in the basement. I'll stay out of your way." "This isn't up for discussion." He checked his watch like I was wasting his time, like throwing out a 70-year-old woman was just another item on his to-do list. "You have 15 minutes to pack your things." 15 minutes. 2 years I'd lived here. 2 years of making myself invisible, helpful, grateful for the roof over my head. And I got 15 minutes. I looked at Maggie one more time. "Please don't do this." She finally raised her head. Our eyes met for just a second, and what I saw there broke my heart more than Steven's words ever could. Fear, resignation, and something else I couldn't quite name. Then she turned and walked upstairs. I heard a door close softly. She was gone. My hands were shaking as I walked to the small room off the kitchen. It had been a guest room once back when I first moved in. Now it was just a place to keep things they didn't want to see. Things like me. I pulled my old duffel bag from under the bed. David had bought it for a camping trip we never got to take. He died of a heart attack 3 months before we were supposed to go. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of being a widow. 2 years of slowly watching my savings disappear on medical bills and funeral costs. 2 years of being grateful when Maggie offered me a place to stay. I packed quickly, mechanically. 3 cotton shirts, 1 pair of jeans, the sweater with the hole in the sleeve I kept meaning to fix, underwear, socks, a toothbrush. My hands found the photograph on the nightstand, David in his reading glasses, smiling at something I'd said. I tucked it carefully into the front pocket of the bag. When I came back downstairs, Steven was holding the front door open. The October wind rushed in, cutting through my thin sweater. I looked around for Maggie, but the upstairs remained silent. "My bank account," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one we set up together, Maggie and I, for emergencies. There's still about $15,000 in there from selling the house after David died." "Angela is the primary account holder," Steven said. She'll manage it appropriately. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. That's my money, Stephen. I need it to what you don't have rent to pay anymore. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Consider it payment for room and board these past 2 years. But I cooked, I cleaned, I watched the children. And we gave you a place to live when no one else would. He gestured to the door. I think we're more than square, don't you? I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. I wanted my daughter to come down those stairs and tell him to stop, to be reasonable, to remember that I was her mother and I deserved better than this. But Maggie didn't come. I walked out onto the porch. Behind me, I heard the door close. The lock clicked. The porch light went out. I stood there on the sidewalk with my duffel bag and $47 in my wallet, the only cash I'd kept separate from that bank account, just a little emergency money I'd tucked away. The street was dark and empty. The October wind cut through my sweater like it was looking for a way in. I was 70 years old. I had $47, one bag, and a daughter who couldn't look me in the eye. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. But I couldn't stand there forever. So I walked. I walked until my feet ached in my worn sneakers. The houses of Maggie's nice neighborhood gave way to older homes, then to commercial buildings, then to a part of Madison I'd never been to before. The streetlights grew farther apart. The wind grew colder. My arthritis was flaring up, that deep ache in my knees and wrists that comes with age and cold weather. Each step sent little jolts of pain up my legs, but I kept moving. David used to say, "Keep moving, Ruthie. Your body makes its own heat if you let it." I wasn't Ruthie anymore. That was David's name for me, his alone. I was Zoe now. Just Zoe. Zoe Bennett, 70 years old, walking through the October night with nowhere to go. Eventually, I found Davidson Park. Just a small neighborhood park with a few benches, a rusted swing set, and a play structure the city probably should have replaced years ago. The swings creaked in the wind, a lonely sound that matched exactly how I felt. I sat down on the nearest bench and pulled my duffel bag onto my lap, wrapping my arms around it like it might keep me warm. It didn't. The cold worked its way through my sweater, through my jeans, through my skin. My fingers went numb first, then my toes. I thought about David, about the way he used to bundle me up before we'd go out to shovel snow. "Layer up, Zoe," he'd say, wrapping his scarf around my neck even though he needed it more. "Can't have you catching cold." A sob caught in my throat. I pressed my hand over my mouth to hold it in. Crying wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't change the fact that I was sitting on a park bench at 10 o'clock at night with nowhere to sleep and no one to call. I pulled out my wallet and counted the money again, even though I knew exactly how much was there. $47, 2 20s, a 5, and 2 1s. I counted it 3 times, like maybe if I counted it enough, more money would magically appear. It didn't. The temperature kept dropping. I stood up and paced along the edge of the park, back and forth, back and forth. My knees protested with every step. My back ached, but sitting still meant freezing, and I wasn't ready to freeze. Not yet. Not when I was still angry. And I was angry. Beneath the hurt and the shock and the fear, there was a core of rage burning in my chest. How dare he? How dare Stephen Calloway throw me out like garbage and Maggie God? Maggie, how could she let him? I paced until I was too tired to be angry anymore. Then I paced some more, because the alternative was sitting still, and sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the way Maggie used to hold my hand when she was scared. The way she used to curl up in my lap and fall asleep with her head on my shoulder. The way she used to tell me she loved me every single night before bed. Where did that little girl go? The night stretched on forever. The sky slowly faded from black to deep blue, then to the pale gray of dawn. By the time the sun came up, I was so tired I could barely stand. But I was still breathing. Still alive. That had to count for something. I left the park when the first joggers started to appear. I didn't want anyone to see me. Didn't want anyone to ask questions. I probably looked exactly like what I was, a homeless old woman who'd spent the night on a park bench. I walked back toward downtown Madison past coffee shops that were just opening, past the bakery, where the smell of fresh bread made my stomach twist with hunger. I stopped on a corner and counted my money again. $47. I could buy food. A cheap breakfast would be maybe $5. That would leave 42. But then what another night on a park bench, and the night after that, winter was coming. I wouldn't survive a Wisconsin winter sleeping outside. I needed a plan. I needed to think. The Madison Public Library opened at 9. I was waiting on the steps when the librarian unlocked the doors. She was a young woman, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Jessica. "Good morning," she said, then looked at me more carefully. "Are you all right?" "Just cold," I said, forcing a smile. "Looking forward to warming up with a good book." She let me in, and I headed straight for the bathroom. It was clean and warm, and for the first time in 12 hours, I was out of the wind. I washed my face in the sink, trying to make myself look presentable. The woman in the mirror looked old and tired. When had I gotten so many lines around my eyes? When had my hair gotten so gray, I looked away? The library was nearly empty this early. I found a chair near a window where the sun was streaming in and sat down. The warmth felt like heaven. I could have fallen asleep right there, but I needed to think. What were my options? I could try to access my bank account, but Stephen was right. Maggie was the primary holder. We'd set it up that way because the banker said it would make things easier if something happened to me. I trusted her. God, I'd been so stupid. I could look for a job, but who was going to hire a 70-year-old woman with no recent work experience? I'd been a secretary decades ago before Maggie was born. Everything was computers now. I barely knew how to send an email. I could find a shelter, and my heart sank at the thought. A homeless shelter. At 70 years old. After working my whole life, after raising a daughter, after burying a husband, it had come to this. No, I couldn't do it. Not yet. There had to be another way. I was still sitting there staring out the window when I saw it. Across the street. The Dane County Courthouse, the imposing brick building with wide stone steps and a bulletin board out front covered in notices and announcements. Something made me get up. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, maybe just the need to keep moving, to keep doing something, anything, to avoid thinking about how thoroughly my life had fallen apart. I crossed the street and climbed the courthouse steps. They were steep, and my knees protested every single one, but I made it to the top. The bulletin board was covered with all sorts of official-looking notices. Permits, ordinances, public meetings, property tax delinquencies. And then I saw it. A small notice pinned near the bottom, partially covered by a newer notice about parking regulations. Property auction, county foreclosure, abandoned residence location. 6 miles south of Millbrook, South Dakota, minimum bid $3 auction date, October 12th, 10 a.m. I read it twice, then a third time. $3. I had $47. I could afford a $3 house. My hands started to shake, and this time it wasn't from the cold. A house for $3 didn't make sense. Houses didn't cost $3. There had to be something wrong with it, something broken, something dangerous, something that made it worthless to everyone else. But it wasn't worthless to me, because I had nowhere to go, no family that wanted me, no savings I could access, no plan, just $47 and a house that needed exactly 3 of them. I stood there on the courthouse steps with the October sun finally warming my face, and for the first time since Stephen had told me to leave, I felt something other than fear and hurt. I felt hope. It was probably foolish. It was probably crazy. A $3 house in South Dakota, I didn't even know where Millbrook was. But it was something. It was a chance. It was mine if I wanted it. The auction was in 4 days. October 12th. I had 4 days to get to South Dakota, 4 days to decide if I was brave enough or desperate enough to bet everything on a $3 house. I looked at the notice one more time, memorizing every detail. Then I walked back to the library. Jessica was at the front desk. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you help me use one of the computers I need to look up bus routes?" She smiled. "Of course. Where are you trying to go?" I took a deep breath. "South Dakota, a town called Millbrook." I spent the next 3 days in the library. Jessica never asked why I was there from opening to closing, why I kept washing my face in the bathroom sink, why I was looking up information about South Dakota property laws and foreclosure auctions. She just brought me coffee sometimes. "Extra from the break room," she'd say. Didn't want it to go to waste. I knew she was lying, and I loved her for it. At night, I went back to Davidson Park. The temperature kept dropping. I wore all 3 of my shirts layered together and slept sitting up on the bench with my duffel bag clutched to my chest. I dozed more than slept, jerking awake every time I heard a noise, every time the cold worked its way too deep into my bones. On the second night, a police officer stopped his patrol car and walked over to me. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here." "I'm not sleeping," I said, which was true enough. "Just resting." He looked at me for a long moment. He was young, probably 30, with kind eyes that reminded me of Jessica the librarian. "There's a shelter on West Washington, Grace House. They'll have a bed for you." "I'm fine, thank you." "Ma'am," I said, "I'm fine." I heard the snap in my voice and regretted it immediately. He was trying to help, but I couldn't go to a shelter. Not yet. I had a plan now. I just needed 3 more days. He sighed. "I'm going to pretend I didn't see you here. But if I come back and you're still here, I'll have to cite you for vagrancy. You understand?" I nodded. He left. I stayed another hour, then moved to a different park. During the day, I planned. The bus from Madison to Sioux Falls, South Dakota would cost $24. From Sioux Falls to Millbrook, the librarian helped me find out there was a local bus that ran twice a week, $4.50 each way. That was $28.50 for transportation, $3 for the house. That left me with $15.50. Not much, but enough to maybe possibly hopefully survive until I figured out what to do next. On October 11th, the day before the auction, I bought a Greyhound ticket with the last of my cash reserves. $24 to Sioux Falls, departing at 2 p.m., arriving at 8 p.m. I had $23 left to my name. That night, I didn't go to a park. I spent my last night in Madison in the Greyhound station, sitting in a plastic chair that was somehow less comfortable than the park bench, surrounded by other people who had nowhere else to be at midnight. I thought about Maggie. I wondered if she'd noticed I was gone, if she'd tried to find me, if she'd lain awake at night wondering if I was safe. Probably not. If she cared, she would have stopped Stephen. She would have opened that door. She would have at least looked at me. I pulled out the photograph of David. In the harsh fluorescent light of the bus station, his smile looked sad. "What would you do?" I whispered to the picture. "Tell me what to do, David." But David was gone. I was alone. And in 12 hours I would be on a bus to South Dakota to buy a house for $3. God help me. The Greyhound bus was half empty. I took a window seat near the back and watched Wisconsin disappear behind me. The landscape changed slowly, cities giving way to small towns to farmland to the flat, endless prairie of South Dakota. I'd brought a granola bar from a convenience store, the cheapest thing I could find. 99 cents. I ate it slowly, making it last even though it tasted like cardboard. I needed to make my money stretch. A young woman got on the bus in La Crosse. She couldn't have been more than 19 with a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup and a backpack that looked like it had seen better days. She sat down next to me, even though there were plenty of empty seats. "Is it okay if I sit here?" she asked. "Of course." We rode in silence for a while. Then she said, "I'm Jenny. I'm running away from my boyfriend. Ex-boyfriend." I looked at her black eye. "Good." She laughed, a bitter sound. "My mom said I should go back to him. Said I probably deserved it, that I must have done something to make him mad." She wiped at her eyes. "So I'm going to my aunt's place in Rapid City. I've never even met her, but she said I could come." "You're brave," I said. "I'm terrified." "That's what makes you brave." She smiled a little at that. "What about you?" "Where are you headed?" "A town called Millbrook. I'm buying a house." "Oh, that's exciting. Your first house." I thought about the house David and I had bought when we were 30, the little ranch with the blue shutters and the maple tree in the front yard, the house where we'd raised Maggie, the house I'd had to sell to pay for David's funeral and medical bills. "My second," I said. "I'm starting over." "At least you have a house waiting," Jenny said. "That's something." I thought about the $3 house I'd never seen, the house that was probably falling apart, probably condemned, probably completely unlivable. "Yes," I said. "That's something." We talked for the rest of the ride. Jenny told me about her ex-boyfriend, about the day she finally decided enough was enough. I told her about Maggie, about Stephen, about being thrown out with nothing but a duffel bag. When we got to Sioux Falls, Jenny hugged me. "You're going to be okay," she said. "I can tell. You're stronger than you look." "So are you." I watched her get on the bus to Rapid City. Then I went to find the local bus to Millbrook. There wasn't one until morning. Of course there wasn't. I spent another night in a bus station, this one even smaller and colder than the one in Madison. But I was one day closer to the auction. One day closer to having a place to call my own, even if it was falling apart. At 6 a.m., I bought a cup of terrible coffee for $1.50. At 8 a.m., I boarded the local bus to Millbrook. The driver was an older man, maybe 65, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Millbrook," he said when I asked for a ticket. "Don't get many folks heading out that way." $4.50. I counted out my money carefully. $4.50. I had 17 left. Number 14. The house would cost $3. $14 to survive on until I figured out what came next. The bus was small, more like a van really, with only 6 seats. I was the only passenger. The driver, Walter, according to his name tag, looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You got family in Millbrook?" "I have a house there, sort of." "Sort of. I'm buying it today, at auction." He whistled low. "The county auction? That Harper place?" My heart skipped. "You know about it?" "Sure, whole county knows. Been sitting empty since 2018, maybe 2019. Roof caved in one winter and nobody wanted to take it on. County's tried to sell it twice before. No takers?" "Why not?" He glanced at me in the mirror. "No offense, ma'am, but that house is more rubble than structure. Be cheaper to tear it down and start fresh than try to fix what's there." My stomach sank. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the county set the minimum bid at $3 just to get someone to take responsibility for it." He was quiet for a moment. "You really planning to live there?" "I don't have anywhere else to go." He met my eyes in the mirror. His expression was kind but sad. "Winter comes early out here. Usually starts snowing by mid-November. You got about 3 weeks, maybe 4, before the first storm." 3 weeks. To make an unlivable house livable. To figure out how to survive with $14. It was impossible, but what choice did I have? "I'll manage," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Walter didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. We drove in silence for a while, the flat South Dakota prairie stretching out in every direction. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. No hills, no trees, just endless grass and sky. After about 45 minutes, Walter slowed down. "This is Millbrook." I looked out the window. Millbrook wasn't really a town so much as a cluster of buildings along a 2-lane highway. I counted 1 gas station, 1 general store, 1 small diner, 1 post office, and what looked like a fabric shop. That was it. "Population 340, Walter said, "give or take. Most folks around here are farmers. Good people, but they keep to themselves." He pulled up in front of the general store. "Auction's at the courthouse. Just down the road, you can't miss it." I stood up, grabbing my duffel bag. "Thank you, Walter." "Ma'am," he turned to look at me. "I meant what I said about winter. It's no joke out here. You need help, you come find me. I drive this route Tuesdays and Fridays. You hear?" My eyes stung. It had been 3 days since someone had offered to help me without wanting something in return. "I hear you. Thank you." I climbed off the bus and stood on the side of the road, watching it drive away. The October wind was even colder here than it had been in Madison, cutting across the prairie with nothing to stop it. I checked my watch. 9:30 a.m. The auction started at 10. I started walking toward the courthouse. The Millbrook Courthouse was a small brick building that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. Inside, the auction room smelled like dust and old paper, and the kind of history that settles into places when nothing ever changes. There were maybe 10 other people scattered around the room, mostly men in work boots and flannel jackets. A few of them looked at me when I walked in, but no one said anything. At the front of the room, a woman sat behind a table stacked with files. She was in her 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her nameplate read, "Helen Morrison, County Clerk." At exactly 10 o'clock, Helen cleared her throat. "Good morning. We'll begin with Lot 47, residential property foreclosed in 2018, located approximately 6 miles south of Millbrook on County Road 15D. She looked up, scanning the room over her glasses. "This property is sold as is with no warranties. The structure has significant damage, including a partial roof collapse. No utilities are currently connected. The county has determined that demolition costs exceed property value." She paused. "For this reason, we've set an unusually low minimum bid of $3. The successful bidder will assume all responsibility for the property, including any necessary demolition or repairs." A man in the front row snorted. $3 for a pile of rubble. Some deal." Helen ignored him. "Do I have a bid of $3? The room was silent. My heart was hammering so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My hand was shaking, but I lifted it anyway. $3. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I felt their eyes taking in my worn sweater, my old duffel bag, my 70-year-old face. Helen looked at me for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Not pity exactly. Maybe recognition. Maybe respect. "I have $3, she said. "Do I have any other bids?" More silence. A man in the second row whispered something to his neighbor. I caught the words, "poor thing," and "doesn't know what she's getting into." Helen waited a full 30 seconds, her pen poised over the ledger. Hearing no further bids, sold to the woman in the back for $3. She gestured me forward. My legs felt shaky as I walked to the front of the room, but I made it. Helen slid a form across the table. "Sign here and here, please." I signed. My handwriting looked old and shaky. I hated that. Helen stamped the form, then pulled a certificate from a drawer and filled it out by hand. "That'll be $12 for the processing fee." $12. Not two like in my research. Of course not. Nothing was ever as simple as I hoped. I opened my wallet and counted out 12 of my 14 remaining dollars. My hands were trembling. Helen took the money without comment and tucked it into a cash box. Then she slid the certificate across the table to me. I stared at the words. Owner. I owned something. For the first time in 2 years, I owned something that was mine and mine alone. "Good luck, Mrs. Bennet," Helen said quietly. There was something in her voice that made me look up. She was watching me with those sharp eyes. "You're going to need it." I folded the certificate carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket right next to the photograph of David. $2 left. $2 and a house I'd never seen. I walked out of that courthouse into the October wind. The sky had turned gray while I was inside. The temperature was dropping. I could smell it in the air, the sharp, clean scent that meant snow wasn't far behind. Walter had said I had 3 weeks before the first storm. I needed to find the house. I needed to see what I'd bought. I walked up to a woman who was getting into a pickup truck outside the general store. "Excuse me, do you know where County Road 15 is?" She pointed south. "Straight down the main road, about 6 miles. You'll see it on the left." She looked at me more carefully. "You're the one who bought the Harper place, aren't you?" Word traveled fast in a town this small. "Yes, ma'am." She shook her head. "That house has been dying for 6 years. I'm sorry, honey, but I don't think anyone could bring it back." "I have to try." "Why, you got family around here?" "No, ma'am. I just have the house." She studied me for a long moment. Then she reached into her truck and pulled out a bottle of water and a granola bar. "Here, you're going to need these." "I can't take them." Her voice was firm but kind. "Winter doesn't care about pride. Out here, we help each other." I took the water and the granola bar. "Thank you." "I'm Ruth Porter. I run the fabric shop on Main Street. You need anything, you come find me." "Zoe Bennet?" She nodded. "Well, Zoe Bennet, I hope that house is better than everyone says. But if it's not..." She pulled out a business card and pressed it into my hand. "You come see me. Understand?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Ruth drove away and I started walking south. 6 miles. At 70 years old with arthritis in my knees that would take me 2, maybe 3 hours. I started walking. The house appeared on the horizon after about 2 miles. From that distance, it was just a dark shape against the gray sky, standing alone in the middle of the prairie like a broken tooth. I kept walking. Every step the house came into clearer focus. Every step my heart sank a little further. The roof had caved in on the right side, leaving a gaping hole where shingles and beams had collapsed into what must have been the attic. The windows were just empty frames now, the glass long gone, leaving dark, hollow eyes staring out at nothing. The front door hung crooked on a single rusted hinge, swaying slightly in the wind like it was too tired to hold itself up anymore. The siding was weathered to gray split and warped in places where the wood had rotted through. I could see gaps between the boards, cracks wide enough that the wind would blow straight through. By the time I reached the property line, I could barely breathe. Not from the walk, though my knees were screaming and my feet were blistered. From the sheer impossibility of what I was looking at. This wasn't a house. This was a corpse of a house. A skeleton. A ruin. This was what $3 bought. I stood there for 10 full minutes, just staring. I wanted to cry. I wanted to sit down in the dirt and give up. I wanted to walk back to Millbrook and beg Ruth Porter to let me sleep in her fabric shop. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I walked up to what was left of the porch. The steps were rotted through in places. I tested the first one carefully before putting my weight on it. It held. Barely. I climbed onto the porch. The boards creaked and sagged, but they didn't break. The front door had no lock. I pushed it open easy since it was barely hanging on and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Mildew and rot and the musty scent of abandonment. The floor was littered with dead leaves and dirt that had blown in through the broken windows. In the corner I could see daylight streaming through a gap in the wall where two boards had pulled apart. I walked through the front room into what must have once been a kitchen. The sink was rusted through brown water stains streaking down the cabinets. The cupboards hung open empty except for mouse droppings. The back door was missing entirely, just an open rectangle looking out onto more prairie. I went back to the front room and looked up. Through the hole in the roof, I could see the gray October sky. As I watched, the first snowflake of the season drifted down through the opening and landed on my upturned face. I stood there in the center of my $3 house with snow starting to fall and my last $2 in my pocket, and I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A slightly hysterical laugh that might have been close to crying. What had I done? What was I thinking? A 70-year-old woman couldn't survive winter in this place. It was impossible. Insane. Suicidal. But then I thought about Maggie's house. The warm, comfortable house with the locked door and the porch light that went out the second I stepped outside. I thought about Stephen's face, that look of contempt like I was trash he was taking to the curb. I thought about the bank account with my $15,000 that I couldn't access. I thought about sleeping on park benches and bus stations. And I stopped laughing. This house was broken. This house was cold. This house was falling apart. But it was mine. No one could tell me to leave. No one could look through me like I didn't exist. No one could lock the door behind me and turn out the lights. I set my duffel bag down on the floor, carefully away from the wettest areas. Then I walked back outside and started gathering anything I could use. There was a fallen tree branch near the property line. I dragged it back to the house, my arthritic hands screaming in protest. Near the collapsed section of roof, I found boards that had fallen but were still intact. Weathered but not rotted through. I worked until the sun started to set, until my hands were blistered and my back was on fire with pain. I gathered wood. I found a rusty metal drum that could maybe possibly work as a makeshift stove. I collected every piece of plastic I could find in the debris, an old tarp, some sheet plastic, anything that might help keep the cold out. By the time darkness fell, I'd managed to drag most of my findings into the front room, into the corner farthest from the holes and gaps. I ate Ruth Porter's granola bar, slowly making it last. I drank half the bottle of water. I needed to ration carefully. Then I sat down in that corner with my back against the wall and my duffel bag behind me like a pillow. I was wearing every piece of clothing I owned, all 3 shirts layered together, my jeans, my torn sweater. It wasn't enough. The cold crept in from every direction. Within an hour, I couldn't feel my fingers. The wind picked up, howling through the empty window frames. Something skittered across the floor in the dark, mice, probably. Or rats. Outside, I could hear that tree branch I'd moved scraping against the siding over and over, a slow, rhythmic scratching. I pulled my knees up to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to make myself as small as possible. I thought about David, about Maggie when she was little, about the life I'd had that seemed so far away now it might have belonged to someone else. "You can do this, Zoe," I whispered into the dark. My voice sounded small and strange in the empty room. "You've done harder things than this. Had I thought I'd buried a husband at 68, I'd raised a daughter mostly alone after David's heart problems started. I'd survived 69 winters before this one. I could survive one more night. I had to. The hours crawled by. The cold got worse. My body ached from sitting on the hard floor. At some point I must have dozed off because I jerked awake to the sound of something crashing outside. A branch falling maybe. Or part of the roof. I opened my eyes and saw the faintest trace of gray light creeping through the broken windows. Morning. I'd made it through the first night. I was still here, still breathing, still alive. I pulled myself to my feet, every joint protesting, and looked around at the broken house in the cold morning light. This was my home now, this pile of rubble and rotted wood and broken dreams. And somehow, I was going to make it work. The morning sun came through the holes in my walls like uninvited guests, harsh and cold. I stood in the middle of what used to be a living room taking inventory of my situation with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes when you're out of options. I had $2 in my pocket. I had a house with no roof, no windows, no doors, no heat, no water, and no electricity. I had the clothes on my back, a duffel bag with 2 spare outfits, and a photograph of my dead husband. And I had maybe 3 weeks before the first real snowstorm hit. "All right, Zoe," I said out loud because the silence was too heavy and hearing my own voice made me feel less alone. "What do you need to survive? Water, food, warmth, shelter." I walked outside, my breath fogging in the October air. The temperature had dropped into the 30s overnight. My joints ached with every step, the arthritis flaring hot and sharp in my knees and wrists. About a quarter mile from the house, I could see a line of scraggly trees. Where there were trees, there might be water. I started walking, the prairie grass crunching under my feet. I was right. A small creek ran through the property, barely 3 feet wide, but flowing steadily. The water looked clear. I knelt down, my knees cracking loud enough to scare a bird from a nearby bush, and cupped my hands to drink. It was ice cold and tasted faintly of minerals, but it was water. I drank deeply, then splashed some on my face. The shock of cold made me gasp, but it also woke me up, cleared my head. I had water. That was one problem solved. On my way back to the house, I gathered anything that might be useful. Fallen branches for firewood. An old plastic bucket with a crack in it, not perfect, but it would hold water if I was careful. A rusted coffee can. Near what must have once been a garden, I found evidence that someone had lived here, had tried to make a life here. Bits of broken pottery. A child's toy truck, sun-faded and missing wheels. The metal frame of a bed half buried in weeds. It made me sad thinking about the family that must have lived here. Where had they gone? What had driven them away? I was still thinking about this when I heard the sound of a truck engine. A blue pickup was coming down the dirt road, slowing as it approached my property. My heart started racing. I didn't know if I should be scared or hopeful. Out here, so isolated, a stranger could be either salvation or danger. The truck pulled up and stopped. A man climbed out, older, maybe 70 himself, with white hair under a faded John Deere cap and the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of outdoor work. "You the one who bought this place?" he called out. "I am." He walked closer, studying me with sharp blue eyes. "Frank Walsh. My wife Dorothy and I have a farm about a mile down the road." "Zoe Bennett." He looked past me at the house, then back at my face. "Folks in town said you wouldn't last a week out here." I lifted my chin. "I'm still here." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "That you are." He was quiet for a moment, still studying me. "You know anything about fixing houses?" "I'm learning." "You got tools?" I shook my head. He walked back to his truck and returned with a wooden toolbox. He set it down at my feet and opened it. Inside were a hammer, a box of nails, a handsaw, a measuring tape, and a pair of work gloves. "These are," I started to say. "On loan," he cut me off. "Bring them back when you're done, or when you give up and leave, whichever comes first." "I'm not leaving." He looked at me for a long moment. "We'll see. You know how to use these." I thought about all the times I'd watched David work on our house, holding boards while he measured, handing him nails, learning by watching even though I'd never done it myself. "I can figure it out." He pointed at the house. "That roof's your biggest problem. You get snow on that hole, the whole structure could come down. You need to patch it before the weather turns." "I know." "You got any money?" I thought about my last $2. "Not much." Frank nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "Come by my place tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I've got fence work needs doing. You do a good job, I'll pay you. You do a bad job, I'll tell you to leave and we'll call it even." "I'll be there." He climbed back in his truck, then paused with the door open. "Mrs. Bennett Winter doesn't care if you're tough or determined. It just comes. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand." "Good." He shut the door and drove away, dust rising behind his truck. I looked down at the toolbox. Real tools. A chance to earn money. Maybe, just maybe, I could do this. That afternoon, I walked the 6 miles back to Millbrook. My feet were blistered, my knees screaming, but I needed to understand this town. Needed to know what resources existed, who might help, who might hire me. The main street was quiet. A few people on the sidewalk, a couple of trucks parked outside the general store. Everyone looked at me, the stranger, the woman who'd bought the death trap for $3. I saw Ruth Porter's fabric shop and remembered her kindness. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pushed open the door. A bell chimed overhead. The shop smelled like cotton and old wood and was blessedly warm. I stood just inside the door, letting the heat sink into my bones. "Zoe Bennett." Ruth appeared from behind a counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Figured you'd be dead or gone by now." "Still here." She studied me with those sharp eyes. "You look half frozen. How cold did it get in that house last night?" "Cold enough." "Sit down before you fall down." She pointed to a chair near a space heater. "I'll make tea." I wanted to protest to say I was fine, but my legs were shaking and that chair looked like heaven. I sat. Ruth came back with 2 mugs of tea, strong and hot and sweet. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my frozen fingers. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. That house is going to kill you if you're not careful." She sat down across from me. "Why'd you really buy it, Zoe? And don't tell me you just needed a place to stay. Plenty of shelters between here and wherever you came from." I looked into my tea, watching the steam rise. "My son-in-law threw me out. I had $47 and nowhere to go. The house cost $3. The math was simple." "Nothing about surviving a South Dakota winter in that wreck is simple." "I know." I met her eyes. "But it's mine. That matters." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I lost my husband 10 years ago. Tractor accident. Folks said I should sell the farm, move in with one of my sons in Sioux City. Said a woman my age couldn't run a place alone. But you did." "Damn right I did. Because it was mine." She stood up and walked to the back of the shop. When she came back, she was carrying a large roll of heavy canvas and a coil of rope. She set them on the counter. "For the roof," she said. "It won't be permanent, but it'll keep most of the weather out until you can do better." I stood up, my throat tight. "Ruth, I can't pay you." "Did I ask for payment?" "No, but nothing. Out here we take care of each other, because winter doesn't care about pride or independence or who owes what to whom. Winter just comes and you better be ready." She pushed the canvas toward me. "You'll pay me back someday somehow. That's how it works." I accepted the canvas and rope, blinking back tears. "How do I even—" "You'll figure it out. You look like someone who knows how to solve problems." Ruth pulled out a needle and heavy thread. "You know how to sew?" "Yes." "Good. Folks around here are always needing mending done. Coveralls, work shirts, that kind of thing. I'll send them your way if you want. Won't pay much, but every little bit helps." "I'd appreciate that." She handed me a bag with needles, thread, and some scrap fabric. "Consider it a loan like Frank's tools. You'll pay me back when you can." I walked out of Ruth Porter's shop with my arms full and my heart fuller. I had materials to fix my roof. I had the possibility of work. I had 2 people in this town who'd decided I was worth helping. Maybe I really could survive this. The next morning I was at Frank Walsh's farm at 5:45 a.m. The sun wasn't even up yet, and the temperature was in the low 30s. My breath fogged in the air as I walked up the long driveway. The farm was neat and well-maintained. A white farmhouse, a red barn field stretching out in every direction. Frank was already outside loading tools into the back of his truck. "You're early," he said. "Didn't want to be late." His wife Dorothy came out of the house carrying a thermos and 2 mugs. She was a small woman, maybe 65, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and kind eyes. "You must be Zoe," she said. "Frank told me about you." "Yes, ma'am." "Have you eaten?" I thought about my last meal, Ruth Porter's granola bar 36 hours ago. "I'm fine." Dorothy gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. "Frank, you make sure this woman gets a proper lunch. You hear me?" "Yes, dear." She handed us the thermos and mugs. Coffee, hot and strong. The work was hard. Brutal, actually. We were replacing a section of wooden fence that had rotted out about 50 yards of it. That meant pulling out old posts, digging new holes, setting new posts, and nailing crossbeams. My hands blistered within the first hour. My back started aching after 2 hours. By noon, I could barely grip the hammer. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. This was $40 I desperately needed. Frank worked alongside me, not saying much, but I could feel him watching, testing me, seeing if I'd quit. I didn't quit. At noon, Dorothy drove out in her own truck with sandwiches, apples, and more coffee. We sat in the shade of the barn, and I ate like I hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from the truth. You're doing good work, Frank said finally. Surprised me, I'll admit. Why, because I'm old or because I'm a woman? He smiled a little. Both, maybe, but mostly because nobody expected you to still be here. He bit into his sandwich. That house has defeated better men than you or me. Then I guess I'll have to be better than better men? Dorothy laughed at that. I like her, Frank. We worked until 6 that evening. By the time we finished, I could barely stand. Every muscle in my body screamed. My hands were raw and bleeding in places where the blisters had popped. But the fence was done. 50 yards of solid straight fence that would last for years. Frank inspected our work, carefully checking every post, every nail. Finally, he nodded. You'll do. He pulled out his wallet and counted out 4 $20 bills. $40 for 8 hours. Fair, Fair. It was more money than I'd held in a week. More than fair. You need more work, you come back Thursday. I got barn repairs need doing. Dorothy pressed a paper bag into my hands. Leftover pot roast, some vegetables, a loaf of bread. Don't argue, I made too much anyway. I clutched the bag like it was gold. Thank you. Both of you. Walking back to my house that evening with $40 in my pocket and food for several days, I felt something I hadn't felt since Stephen threw me out. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked like I'd never worked before. I patched the roof with Ruth's canvas using rocks and scrap wood to hold it down. It wasn't pretty, but it kept most of the rain and snow out. I used plastic sheeting to cover the broken windows, sealing them with duct tape I'd bought at the general store. Not perfect, but better than nothing. I stuffed fabric scraps and old newspapers into the cracks between the boards, creating a kind of primitive insulation. I built a rocket stove from cinder blocks I'd found in the debris, a design I'd seen in a library book back in Madison. It was more efficient than burning wood in an open fire, using less fuel and producing more heat. Every day I walked to Frank's farm for work. Some days it was fence repair, some days barn work. Once he had me help Dorothy in the garden, harvesting the last of the fall vegetables before the first hard freeze. They paid me $40 a day, and Dorothy always sent me home with food. Ruth sent sewing work my way. $10 to hem a pair of work pants. $15 to repair a torn jacket. $20 to take in a dress for old Mrs. Henderson who'd lost weight after her surgery. I met Isaiah Coleman in the second week. He ran a small carpentry shop on the edge of town, a black man maybe 55 who'd moved to Millbrook from Chicago 15 years ago and mostly kept to himself. I'd gone to his shop to ask if he had any scrap wood I could buy cheap. He looked me over with careful eyes. You're the woman living in the Harper place. That's me. That house is condemned. Should have been torn down years ago. Well, I'm living in it now, so I'd appreciate it not falling down on my head. He almost smiled at that. Almost. You know anything about carpentry? Not much, but I learned fast. He studied me for another long moment. Then he gestured to a broken chair in the corner. Fix that. I'll watch. It took me 2 hours to figure out what was wrong, a broken support rail, and another hour to cut a replacement piece and fit it properly. My measurements were off twice. I had to start over once. But when I was done, the chair was solid. Isaiah sat in it, testing it. Stood up, examined my work closely. You'll do. $12 an hour you work as my assistant. But you work for free the first week while you learn. After that, if you're any good, I'll pay you. Deal. For the next week, I spent mornings at Frank's farm and afternoons at Isaiah's workshop. I learned how to read a tape measure properly, how to cut a straight line, how to recognize different types of wood and what each was good for. Isaiah didn't talk much. He'd lost his wife and daughter in a car accident years ago, Ruth told me. Came to Millbrook to escape the memories. But when he did talk, I listened, because he was teaching me skills that might save my life. On November 11th, I was in the general store buying rice and beans when I heard the weather forecast on the radio. Blizzard warning for central South Dakota. Heavy snow expected November 15th through 16th. Accumulations of 12 to 18 inches. Wind chills down to -10 degrees. Residents should prepare for power outages and travel disruptions. My heart sank. I'd known winter was coming, but hearing it made it real. The storekeeper, an older man named Carl, saw my face. First winter on the prairie. Yes. It's no joke. You got heat, food, water. I'm working on it. He didn't look convinced. Neither was I. I bought everything I could afford with the money I'd saved, $40 worth of rice beans, canned soup, candles, matches, and extra batteries for the small flashlight Ruth had given me. When I got back to the house, I looked at my supplies with a sinking feeling. It wasn't enough. The house still had gaps that let the wind through. My rocket stove worked, but I needed more firewood than I had. The canvas on the roof was already starting to come loose in one corner. I wasn't ready. Over the next 3 days, the community rallied in a way that still makes me cry when I think about it. Frank brought 2 bales of hay. Pack it around the foundation, creates an air barrier, keeps the cold from coming up through the floor. Ruth showed up with 3 wool blankets. Hang them on the inside walls, creates pockets of air, better insulation than you'd think. Isaiah spent an entire Sunday helping me build a real door that actually fit in the frame and had weather stripping. Can't have wind blowing through all winter. Dorothy brought more food, canned vegetables, jars of jam. She'd made 2 loaves of bread. You need to eat more, Zoe. You've lost weight. Mrs. Henderson from the sewing jobs came by with 6-gallon jugs. Fill these before the storm. Creek might freeze. Even people I barely knew stopped by. A farmer named Jim dropped off a cord of firewood. Had extra. Figured you could use it. I tried to thank them, tried to figure out how to repay them. Pay it forward, Ruth said simply. Someday someone else will need help. You'll be there for them. That's how it works. The storm hit on November 15th, exactly as predicted. I woke to complete darkness and the sound of wind howling like something alive and angry. When I looked out my plastic-covered window, I couldn't see more than a few feet through the driving snow. The temperature inside the house was 42 degrees even with the rocket stove burning. Outside it was 5 above zero, with wind chill -10. I fed the stove carefully, rationing my wood. I wore every layer of clothing I owned. I wrapped myself in all 3 wool blankets and still shivered. This was survival. Raw, brutal, minute-by-minute survival. Around noon, though it was hard to tell time in the constant gray darkness, I heard something. A sound barely audible over the wind. Knocking. I thought I was imagining it. Who would be out in this weather? The knocking came again, more desperate. I struggled to the door, my fingers so numb I could barely work the latch. When I finally got it open, a blast of snow and wind nearly knocked me backward. A man stood on my porch carrying an elderly woman in his arms. Behind him, a younger woman was barely standing, covered in snow, her lips blue with cold. "Please," the man gasped. "Our car went off the road, half a mile back. My mother, she's not breathing right." I didn't hesitate. "Get inside, quickly." They stumbled in. I slammed the door against the wind and turned to assess the situation. The elderly woman was unconscious. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her lips were blue. Hypothermia. Moderate to severe. I thought of David, of the time he'd pulled our neighbor from a frozen creek. I remembered what he'd done. "Put her here near the stove, but not too close. We need to warm her slowly." I grabbed my blankets. "What's her name?" "Evelyn," the younger woman said through chattering teeth. "She's 81. We were driving to Sioux Falls for her birthday when—" "Save your strength. Help me get these wet clothes off her." The man Robert, he said his name was, and his wife Lisa helped me strip Evelyn's wet coat and clothes. I wrapped her in dry clothes from my duffel bag, then in the blankets. "We need to warm her from the inside," I said, melting snow in my coffee can on the stove. I added a tiny pinch of the sugar I'd been saving. When it was warm, not hot, just warm, I spooned it into Evelyn's mouth, drop by drop. For 2 hours I worked, monitoring her breathing, keeping her wrapped but not overheated, giving her warm liquids when she could swallow. Robert paced helplessly. Lisa cried quietly. I stayed calm, focused. This woman was not going to die in my house. Finally, around 3 o'clock, Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're safe," I said. "You're going to be okay." Lisa burst into sobs, grabbing her mother-in-law's hand. Robert sat down hard on the floor, his head in his hands. We huddled together in my warm corner for the rest of the day and through the night. I shared my food, the pot roast from Dorothy, the bread, the canned soup. It wasn't much stretched between 4 people, but it was enough. As we ate, Robert told their story. They lived in Des Moines. Robert was a financial advisor. Big house, successful career, everything anyone could want. "But I haven't felt alive in years," he said quietly. "Not until today, when I thought we were going to die. Isn't that crazy?" "Not crazy," I said. "Sometimes you need to lose everything to remember what matters." Lisa looked around at my patched walls, my humble space, My rocket stove made of cinder blocks. You built this yourself. Mostly. It's more of a home than our house has ever been. Evelyn recovered enough to talk, reached over and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You saved my life. A complete stranger saved my life. You needed help. I gave it. Why do you live like this? She asked. So isolated, so hard. I thought about Stephen's locked door, about sleeping on park benches, about the $3 house that everyone said would kill me. Because it's mine, I said simply, because nobody can take it from me, because every morning I wake up here, I prove that I matter. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm 81. I thought I was done surprising myself, but I survived a blizzard in a $3 house. She squeezed my hand. Thank you for reminding me I'm still alive. The storm broke on November 17th. The sky cleared to a brilliant, painful blue. The temperature rose to a balmy 15 degrees. Robert dug out their car. It took 3 hours and got the engine started. Before they left, he pressed an envelope into my hands. $200, he said when I tried to refuse. You gave us our lives. This is nothing compared to that. I'll tell everyone about you, Evelyn said. About the woman in the $3 house who saves lives. After they drove away, I stood in the snow looking at that envelope. $200. More money than I'd had in my hands since Stephen threw me out. I walked inside and added it to the small pile of cash I'd been saving money from Frank from Isaiah, from sewing jobs. $340 total now. For the first time since October, I felt like I might actually make it through winter. That feeling lasted 3 more days. On November 20th, I walked to the post office to check if I had any mail. I didn't expect anything who even knew I was here. But Carl, the postmaster, handed me 2 envelopes. Got something unusual, he said. Forwarded mail from Wisconsin. My heart stopped. I looked at the envelopes. First National Bank of Wisconsin. Prairie Life Insurance Company. Both addressed to me. Both forwarded from Maggie's address in Madison. Mail forwarding was set up October 28th. Carl said, checking his records. By a Angela Calloway. That a relative, October 28th, 3 weeks after Stephen threw me out, right around the time the Harper House auction would have been public record. Maggie knew where I was. She'd known for weeks, and she'd forwarded my mail here instead of opening it herself. Why I walked back to my house in a daze, sat down in my warm corner, stared at the envelopes for 30 minutes before I could make my hands open them. The first letter was from the bank. Dear Estate of Zoe Bennett, we are writing to confirm the closure of account number 4477392, following the death certificate filed November 1st, 2024. As per account beneficiary designation, the remaining balance of $14,847.32 has been transferred to Angela Calloway. The second letter was from the insurance company. Dear Ms. Angela Calloway, your claim for policy number L-847392 held by Zoe Bennett has been approved and paid in full. Policy value $50,000. I read both letters 3 times. Death certificate, November 1st. I'd been declared dead. While I was buying a house. While I was learning to survive. While I was very much alive. Stephen had filed a death certificate. He'd stolen my bank account. He'd collected $50,000 in life insurance. $64,847. That's what my life was worth to them. And somewhere in Wisconsin, my daughter had that money. I sat on the floor of my $3 house, holding those letters in my shaking hands, and felt something inside me crack. Not break, crack, like ice on a frozen lake when the temperature shifts just enough. November 1st. That was the date on the death certificate. 24 days after Stephen threw me out, while I was sleeping on park benches in Madison, while I was riding a Greyhound bus to South Dakota, while I was buying this broken house and learning how to survive. They'd buried me. Without a body. Without proof. They'd held a funeral, accepted condolences, cried their fake tears, and cashed the checks. $64,847. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't hold me. I sank back down, the letters falling from my hands and scattering across the floor. I'm not dead, I whispered to the empty room. I'm right here. I'm alive. But according to the state of Wisconsin, according to the bank, according to the insurance company, I didn't exist. I was a ghost in a broken house, and nobody cared. The rocket stove had gone out while I was reading. I didn't have the energy to relight it. The temperature dropped. 40 degrees, 35, 30. I didn't move. What was the point? I'd worked so hard. I'd survived so much. And for what? They'd erased me anyway. Zoe Bennett dead at 70. Died peacefully in her sleep, probably. Some lie like that. And Maggie. God, Maggie. Had she known? When Stephen filed that death certificate, had she helped him? Or had he fooled her, too? I thought about the forwarded mail. She'd known where I was. The Harper House auction was public record. Anyone could have looked it up. She could have come to find me. Could have called the police. Could have told anyone that I was alive. But she'd just forwarded the mail and kept the money. My daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after David got sick, the baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights, the teenager I'd worked 2 jobs to support. She'd let them declare me dead for $64,000. I lay down on the cold floor and closed my eyes. The temperature inside the house kept dropping. Some distant part of my brain knew I should get up, relight the fire, put on more layers. But the rest of me just didn't care anymore. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should be dead. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours. Maybe longer. I heard knocking, but it seemed far away and unimportant. The door opened. Footsteps. Zoe, where are you? Ruth's voice sharp with worry. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Dear God. Ruth's hands on my shoulder shaking me. Zoe, wake up. Wake up right now. I'm dead, Ruth, I mumbled. Says so right there, on paper, official and everything. You're not dead, you're hypothermic. How long has this fire been out? She was moving quickly, efficiently. I heard the scratch of a match, the crackle of kindling catching. Warmth started to seep into the room. Ruth wrapped me in blankets. Where had she gotten more blankets, and forced hot tea between my lips? I coughed, sputtered, but drank. That's it. Come on, Zoe, come back. As feeling returned to my body, so did the pain. Not just physical pain from the cold, but the crushing weight of what I'd learned. They declared me dead, I said. My voice sounded hollow. $64,000. That's what I'm worth. Ruth didn't say anything. She just held the cup to my lips until I drank more tea. When I could finally sit up on my own, she picked up the scattered letters and read them. Her face went white, then red. Those bastards, she said quietly. Those absolute bastards. Maggie knew where I was, I said. She forwarded the mail. She could have told someone I was alive, but she didn't. You don't know that. She kept the money, Ruth. That's all I need to know. Ruth set the letters down carefully like they might explode. Then she grabbed my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. Listen to me, Zoe Bennett. I found you half frozen on this floor, ready to give up. Is that what you're going to do? Let them win. They already won. They won nothing. Her voice was fierce. You're sitting here breathing alive. Every breath you take proves they're liars and thieves. You going to let them get away with it? What can I do? I'm legally dead. Then get yourself legally alive again. She stood up, pacing. You fight back. You expose what they did. You make them pay. I'm 70 years old with $300 in a broken house. And you survived a blizzard. You saved a woman's life. You built this. She gestured around the patched walls, the rocket stove, the humble but warm space out of nothing. Don't you dare tell me you can't fight back. I looked at her, this woman who'd shown me nothing but kindness since the day I arrived in Millbrook. Why do you care so much? Because I was you once, she said softly. When my husband died, his brother tried to take the farm, said a woman couldn't run it, tried to have me declared incompetent. Almost succeeded. She smiled grimly. But I fought, and I won, and now I'm going to help you fight. Something in her words reached through the fog of despair. I thought about everything I'd survived, the park benches, the first night in this house, the blizzard, learning carpentry at 70 years old. I'd done all that. Me, Zoe Bennett, and I was still here. What do? I whispered. First you eat, then you decide if you're giving up or getting mad. She'd brought soup from her house, real hot homemade soup with vegetables and chicken. As I ate, warmth spread through my body, and with the warmth came something else. Anger, not the hot explosive kind, the cold determined kind that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. They'd tried to erase me. They declared me dead, stolen my money, and thought I'd just disappear. They were wrong. Ruth called Isaiah and Frank that evening. By the time they arrived at my house, I'd made a decision. I was going to fight back. "We need evidence," Frank said, ever practical. "You can't just walk into a police station and say I'm not dead. They'll think you're crazy." "I have the letters," I said. "That's a start, but you need witnesses. People who can confirm you've been alive this whole time." Isaiah was quiet, thoughtful. "I'll testify. I've worked with you almost every day for 3 weeks." "Me too," Ruth said. "And I can get half the town to confirm you've been here." Frank nodded. "The Harts, that family you saved during the blizzard, they'd testify." "We need to do this right," Ruth said. "Not local police, they might not take it seriously. We need state police, maybe even the FBI." "FBI?" I stared at her. "Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal crime, Zoe. This is bigger than you think." Over the next week, we built the case carefully. Isaiah tracked down the Hart family in Des Moines. Robert was shocked when he heard what had happened. "She saved my mother's life and someone declared her dead." His voice crackled with anger over Isaiah's phone. "I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need." Ruth contacted everyone in Millbrook who'd interacted with me. Carl from the post office, Mrs. Henderson who'd hired me for sewing, Jim who'd brought the firewood. All of them willing to sign statements confirming I'd been alive and in South Dakota while the death certificate was being filed. Frank helped me create a timeline. October 8th, thrown out by Stephen. October 12th, bought the Harper House. November 1st, death certificate filed. I was very much alive in South Dakota. November 15th, saved Evelyn Hart during blizzard. November 20th, received letters about my own death. The evidence was damning, but I still needed someone who could make the authorities listen. That's when Ruth remembered James Foster. James Foster had retired to Pierre 3 years ago after 30 years at the Madison Tribune. He still wrote occasional investigative pieces when something caught his interest. Ruth called him. "James, I have a story you need to hear." He drove out to Millbrook the next day, mid-40s with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that took in everything. He sat in my patched-up house listening to my story, taking notes. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "This is massive," he finally said. "Elder abuse, insurance fraud, identity theft. If what you're saying is true—" "It's true," Ruth said firmly. "I believe you, but I need to verify everything before I write this." He looked at me. "Mrs. Bennett, are you prepared for what comes next? Once this story breaks, there will be media attention. Lots of it. Police investigations. Maybe a trial. Your life won't be private anymore." I thought about my life being private in this broken house, invisible to the world, legally dead. "I want people to know what happened," I said. "I want Stephen Calloway to face what he did." James nodded. "Then I'll need to do some background first. I'll need to contact the bank, the insurance company, see the death certificate." "Wait," I interrupted. A thought had been nagging at me since he arrived. "You said you worked at the Madison Tribune for 30 years, yes. Did you know my family, the Calloways?" He frowned, thinking. Then his expression changed. "Stephen Calloway, financial advisor, lives in the Maple Bluff neighborhood." "That's him." James's face went pale. "Mrs. Bennett, I attended your funeral." The room went completely still. "What I whispered. "November 10th, St. Luke's Church in Madison. I was covering another story nearby and saw the notice. Stephen Calloway was someone I'd interviewed before for a financial planning article." He pulled out his phone, scrolling. "I took a photo of the program. Let me find it." He turned the phone toward me. There it was, a funeral program with my name on it. Zoe Marie Bennett, 1954 to 2024. Beloved mother and grandmother. "There was no viewing," James said, slowly remembering. "Closed casket. Stephen said you'd died of a stroke. Very sudden. Very peaceful. I was buying a house in South Dakota when he held that funeral." "Dear God." James set down his phone. "Your daughter Angela, she was there. She was crying. She looked devastated." Something in my chest twisted. She looked devastated. Genuinely so. I remember thinking how sad it was, a daughter losing her mother so suddenly. He paused. "Either she's an incredible actress or she didn't know," I finished. "That's a hell of an or," Frank said quietly. "I thought about Maggie that last night. The tears on her face, the way she couldn't look at me, the way she'd gone upstairs and closed the door. Had she really thought I was dead? Had Stephen convinced her somehow? Or was I just desperately hoping my daughter wasn't as terrible as the evidence suggested? I need to know, I said. Before this goes public, I need to know if Maggie was part of it or if she was fooled too. How? Ruth asked. James was already on his phone. I still have contacts at the Tribune. Let me make some calls. It took James 3 days to piece together the truth. He sat in my house on a cold December afternoon and laid out what he'd found. Stephen Calloway has been under investigation by his firm for financial irregularities. Started about 6 months ago. He's been moving money around using client funds to cover losses in his own investments. He's been stealing, Isaiah said flatly. Essentially, yes. He needed cash fast or he'd be exposed. James pulled out printouts. Your life insurance policy was worth $50,000. Your bank account had almost $15,000. That's $65,000 he could access if you were dead. But I wasn't dead, I said. No, but he made sure everyone thought you were. James laid out another document. I found the doctor who signed your death certificate, Dr. Raymond Pierce. He's Stephen's golf buddy. Ruth made a disgusted sound. Doctor. Pierce admitted off of the record, of course, that Stephen paid him $5,000 to file a false death certificate. Said you'd had a stroke at home, died before the ambulance arrived. No autopsy needed because you had a history of high blood pressure. I don't have high blood pressure, I said. Stephen forged medical records to create that history. The scope of the deception was staggering. He'd planned this. Carefully, methodically planned to kill me on paper so he could steal my money. What about Maggie? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James's expression softened. Your daughter filed for divorce 3 weeks ago, the day after she saw the bank statement showing the insurance payment. She didn't know? According to court documents, she confronted Stephen about where the money came from. He told her it was your life insurance. She said, but she's not dead. He showed her the death certificate and said he'd found you dead the night you left, called 911, but you died before they arrived. He said he didn't tell her right away because she was too emotional. I closed my eyes. Maggie had believed him. She'd thought I was really dead. The divorce papers cite fraud and financial abuse, James continued. Angela Calloway is cooperating with the Wisconsin State Police. She's agreed to testify against Stephen. So she's not a monster, Ruth said. Just a victim too. She still let him throw me out, I said quietly. That's real. That happened. Yes, James agreed. That's also real. I sat with that truth. My daughter had failed me when I needed her, but she hadn't conspired to have me declared dead. She'd been deceived, manipulated, controlled. It didn't erase the hurt, but it made it different somehow. What happens now? I asked. Now I write the story. It'll run in the Madison Tribune and the Pierre Capital Journal simultaneously. After that? James smiled grimly. After that, Stephen Calloway's life is going to get very complicated. The article ran on December 1st. Back from the dead, 70-year-old woman declared deceased found alive in South Dakota. After massive insurance fraud, James had done his job well. The article had everything: the timeline, the evidence, the witnesses' quotes from the Hart family photos of me standing in front of my $3 house. Ruth brought me a copy that morning. We sat in my warm corner, now actually warm with a proper wood stove Frank had installed, and read it together. You ready for what comes next? She asked. No, but I don't think I have a choice. By noon, my phone, a cheap prepaid cell phone Ruth had insisted I buy, was ringing constantly. News stations wanting interviews, police wanting statements, even a lawyer from Sioux Falls offering to represent me pro bono. The story went viral. I didn't really understand what that meant until Ruth showed me her computer at the fabric shop. My face was on news websites across the country. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. The story had everything people loved. Injustice, survival, redemption. Hashtag Zoe Bennett was trending on something called Twitter. You're famous, Ruth said. I looked at the articles, the photos, the thousands of comments from strangers. I just wanted my life back. Well, you're getting it, and then some. The FBI arrived on December 3rd. 2 agents in dark suits sitting in my $3 house asking detailed questions about everything that had happened. We're building a case against Stephen Calloway, Agent Sarah Winters said. She was maybe 38 sharp and professional. Insurance fraud across state lines is federal. We're also looking at the doctor who signed the death certificate. What about Maggie? I asked. My daughter. Ms. Calloway is cooperating fully. Based on the evidence, we believe she was also a victim of fraud. She won't face charges. I didn't know how to feel about that. Relief, anger, both. On December 5th, I received a letter, hand-delivered by the local postmaster who looked at me with something like awe now. The return address was Madison, Wisconsin. Maggie's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Mom, I know you won't believe me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know the truth. I didn't know Stephen filed the death certificate. I swear on everything I hold sacred, I didn't know until the insurance money appeared in our account November 15th. When I asked where it came from, he said, your mother's life insurance. I said, what, she's not dead? He showed me the death certificate. Said you'd had a stroke the night you left, that he'd found you collapsed and called 911, but you died before they arrived. He said he didn't tell me right away because I was too emotional to handle it. He planned a small private funeral. Told our friends you'd wanted it that way. I believed him, Mom. God help me. I believed every word. And then I saw your face on the news. Alive. Living in South Dakota. Surviving in a house I didn't even know existed. He threw you out and then killed you on paper to steal your money. And I let him throw you out. That's the part I can never forgive myself for. I was scared of him. I've been scared of him for years. He controlled everything, the money, the house, the decisions. When he said you had to leave, I knew it was wrong. I knew it in my bones. But I was too weak to stop him. That makes me a coward. That makes me a terrible daughter. I know that. I've filed for divorce. I'm cooperating with the FBI. I'm testifying against him. I've moved into a small apartment with the kids. We're starting over. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I need you to know I love you. I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to be brave. I saw what you built out there. That $3 house. I saw the pictures in the article. You survived when everyone said you'd die. You built a home out of nothing. You saved lives. You're the strongest person I know. You always were. I'm so sorry, Mom, for all of it. Your daughter Maggie, I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down and cried. Not tears of anger this time. Tears of grief for all the years we'd lost, for the relationship that had broken, for the daughter who'd forgotten how to be strong. But also tears of something else. Something that might eventually become forgiveness. The trial began March 3, 2025 in federal court in Madison, Wisconsin. I sat in the front row flanked by Ruth and Isaiah, who'd both taken the week off to support me. Frank and Dorothy sat behind us. Stephen Calloway walked into the courtroom in an expensive suit flanked by his lawyer. He looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished somehow. He didn't look at me. The prosecution was led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Winters, the FBI agent I'd spoken to. She was brilliant, methodical, devastating. Her opening statement laid out the case with surgical precision. This is a case about greed, cruelty, and the attempted erasure of a human life. Stephen Calloway threw out his 70-year-old mother-in-law with nothing. Then he declared her dead to steal $64,847. Meanwhile, Zoe Bennett survived in an abandoned house through one of the harshest winters South Dakota has seen in decades. She didn't just survive. She thrived. She helped others. She lived. And she's here today to prove it. The defense attorney, an expensive lawyer named Thomas Bradford, tried to shift blame. Claimed Dr. Pierce had acted alone. Suggested Maggie was the mastermind. Implied I'd somehow abandoned my family first. The jury didn't buy it. I could see it in their faces. On day 3, I testified. Sarah walked me through everything. October 8th, being thrown out with $47. The $3 house. Surviving winter. Receiving the letters about my own death. How did it feel? Sarah asked. Seeing your own death certificate. My voice shook. Like I'd been erased. Like my whole life, raising my daughter, working, loving my husband, surviving after he died, like it all meant nothing. Like I was garbage to be thrown away and forgotten. I looked at the jury. Several of them had tears in their eyes. The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to make me seem confused, unreliable. Tried to suggest I'd left voluntarily, that I was twisting the facts. Isn't it true, he asked, that you could have gone to a shelter instead of buying that house? Yes, I said. I could have, but I chose dignity instead. I chose to own something, to build something, to prove I still mattered. What choice did your client give me when he declared me dead? He had no response to that. On day 6, Dr. Raymond Pierce testified. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He admitted everything Stephen had paid him $5,000 to file a false death certificate. Showed the emails with Stephen's explicit instructions. Make it look natural. Stroke. No autopsy needed. The defense collapsed. On day 8, Maggie testified. I hadn't seen my daughter in 5 months. She looked thinner, older, worn down by stress and guilt. She walked to the stand without looking at Stephen, but when she passed me, our eyes met for just a second. Hers were full of tears. Sarah questioned her gently. Did you know your husband filed a false death certificate? No. Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper. I thought she really died. Do you love your mother? Maggie started crying. Yes. I failed her, but yes. I've loved her my whole life. I forgot how to show it. She looked at me, then really looked at me. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Stephen's attorney tried to paint Maggie as complicit, but she held firm. Explained years of financial control, emotional manipulation, isolation. When he said my mother had to leave, I knew it was wrong, she said. But I was too scared to stop him. That's my shame to carry. But I didn't know about the death certificate. I didn't know until the money appeared and I asked questions. And then I saw her face on the news, and I knew what kind of monster I'd married. On day 10, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman named Catherine Morrison, looked at Stephen with disgust. Mr. Calloway, you committed one of the most callous acts I've seen in my 30 years on the bench. You didn't just steal money. You tried to erase a person. A woman who'd shown you nothing but kindness. Your own mother-in-law. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, plus full restitution, $64,847 plus $50,000 in damages. Stephen's face went white. For the first time, he looked at me. I looked back, and I smiled. Not a happy smile. A smile that said, I'm still here. You tried to erase me, and I'm still here. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Camera flashes shouted questions, microphones thrust in my face. I gave a brief statement. Justice was served today. I want to thank everyone who supported me, especially the community of Millbrook, South Dakota. They saved my life when my own family tried to end it. Without them, I wouldn't be here. As I turned to leave, I saw Maggie standing off to the side, hesitant. Ruth saw her, too. You want us to stay? I shook my head. Give me a minute. Maggie and I stood facing each other on the courthouse steps. 5 months since I'd been thrown out. 5 months since she'd let Stephen lock that door behind me. Mom, she started, then stopped. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Not yet. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the little girl who used to hold my hand, the teenager who'd needed me, the woman who'd lost her way. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not ready to forgive. The hurt is too deep. But I took a breath. I'm willing to try, if you're willing to earn it. I'll spend my life earning it. Then maybe someday we'll find our way back to each other. Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Ruth came over then. We should go. The media's getting aggressive. As we walked to Ruth's truck, I looked back once. Maggie was still standing on the courthouse steps watching me leave. This time I was the one walking away. The drive back to South Dakota took 6 hours. Ruth drove while I sat in the passenger seat watching Wisconsin disappear behind me. How do you feel? She asked. Tired, relieved, sad, hopeful, all of it. That's normal. When we crossed into South Dakota, something in my chest loosened. This was home now. Not Wisconsin, not Maggie's house, not the life I'd had before. Home was a $3 house in the middle of nowhere. We pulled up to my property just as the sun was setting. The house looked different than it had 5 months ago. Still small, still humble, but solid now. Real. Frank had helped me install proper windows. Isaiah had rebuilt the porch. Dorothy had planted flowers dormant now in winter, but they'd bloom in spring. The light was on inside. I'd left it on before we left, burning in the window like a beacon. Isaiah was waiting on the porch. Figured you might be hungry after the drive. He held up a bag from the diner in town. You're a good man, Isaiah Coleman. You're not so bad yourself, Zoe Bennett. We sat together in my warm house, actually warm now, properly insulated and heated, and ate burgers and fries and talked about everything except the trial. The Heart's called, Isaiah said. Evelyn wants to visit next month, says she needs to see the house that saved her life in the springtime. She's always welcome. After Isaiah left, I sat alone in my house. I looked around at everything I'd built, the walls I'd patched, the stove I'd installed, the life I'd created from absolutely nothing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages, hundreds of them from strangers who'd read my story. You inspired me to leave my abusive husband. I'm 68 and thought my life was over. You proved it's not. Thank you for showing us that we're never too old to start over. I wasn't just a woman who'd survived anymore. I was a symbol, a reminder that people couldn't be erased, that dignity couldn't be bought, that home was what you made it. The restitution money arrived 2 weeks later, $114,847. I stared at the number on my phone screen for a long time. Then I called Frank. You still need help with that barn expansion? Always. I'll pay for materials. You teach me how to build it. I called Ruth. The community center needs a new roof. I'm donating $20,000. I called a domestic violence shelter in Sioux Falls. I'd like to make a monthly donation for women who need help starting over. I kept $50,000 for myself, put it in a new bank account, my name only. Emergency fund properly protected this time. The rest I gave away. To the town that had saved me. To causes that helped people like I'd been helped. Because I'd learned something in that $3 house money couldn't buy dignity. Community couldn't be purchased. Home wasn't about what you owned. It was about what you built. Spring came to South Dakota with a rush of green and warmth that felt like a miracle after the brutal winter. Dorothy's flowers bloomed bright splashes of color against my simple house. Isaiah and I built a small deck where I could sit in the mornings and watch the sunrise over the prairie. I turned 71 in April. The whole town came to my party. Carl from the post office, Mrs. Henderson, Jim who'd brought firewood, all the people who'd helped a stranger survive. On May 11th, Mother's Day, I was sitting on my deck with coffee and the newspaper when I heard a car coming down the road. I knew even before I saw it that it was Maggie. She parked and got out slowly, holding flowers and looking uncertain. Behind her, 2 kids climbed out. My grandchildren. Tommy 7 now, and Sarah 5. I hadn't seen them since before Stephen threw me out. Mom, Maggie said, I know we didn't plan this, but it's Mother's Day and I hoped. Tommy ran up to me. Grandma, Mom said you built this house all by yourself. I knelt down my knees, protesting but holding and hugged him. I had a lot of help, but yes, mostly by myself. That's so cool. Can I see inside? Sarah was shyer, hiding behind her mother, but she smiled at me. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. Maggie stood on the path, tears streaming down her face. I know you said you weren't ready. I said I was willing to try, I interrupted. That's still true. We sat on my deck, all 4 of us. The kids explored the property while Maggie and I talked. Really talked for the first time in years. I'm in therapy, she said. Learning to recognize manipulation, learning to be strong. That's good. The kids and I are doing okay. I got a job at a bookstore. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work. Honest work is good work. We were quiet for a while, watching Tommy chase a butterfly and Sarah pick wildflowers. Your house is beautiful, Maggie said finally. Not in the traditional way, but it's real, solid. You built something real. Yes, I did. I want to build something real too, with the kids. A life that's based on truth and strength, not fear and lies. I looked at my daughter. She was trying. Really trying. That had to count for something. Then come visit, I said. Once a month, bring the kids. Let them see what their grandmother built. Let them learn that it's never too late to start over. Maggie started crying. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for giving me another chance. I didn't say you're welcome. The hurt was still too fresh for that, but I took her hand and held it. It was a start. In June, the town held a celebration. Zoe Bennett Day, they called it, though I'd tried to talk them out of it. The mayor, a farmer named Bill Henderson, gave a speech about resilience and community. Then he handed me a key to the town, symbolic but meaningful. "Zoe," he said, "you came here with $3 and nowhere to go. You could have given up. Instead, you showed us what real strength looks like." They asked me to say a few words. I stood in front of the whole town, all 340 people, and tried to find the right thing to say. "6 months ago," I began, "I had $47 and no one who wanted me. I bought a house for $3. People said it was worthless. They were wrong." I looked out at the faces. Ruth and Isaiah, Frank and Dorothy, the Harts who'd driven in from Des Moines, Maggie and the kids sitting in the back. "Not because the house had value," I continued, "but because I gave it value, same as life. You're worth what you decide you're worth, not what others say, not what they think, what you know deep in your bones that you are." I paused, my voice catching. "Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for saving my life, not just by giving me food and shelter and work, but by seeing me, by treating me like I mattered." The applause was thunderous. That night I walked home to my $3 house. The light in the window glowed warm and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside everything was simple, but mine. I sat on my deck and looked at the stars. Thought about David. Thought about the journey that had brought me here. "I did it, honey," I whispered to the night sky. "I survived. I built something real. I'm home." The prairie wind blew gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers and possibility. I was Zoe Bennett, 71 years old, owner of a $3 house that had become worth more than any mansion, because it was mine, because I'd built it, because every nail I'd hammered, every wall I'd patched, every storm I'd survived, proved one simple truth: I was here. I mattered. I was enough. And that was everything.